Professor Johnson. Professor Johnson and Ms. Scott. And Professor Johnson will make an opening statement.
The issue before the House is essentially simple. Evolutionary science takes its starting point from a philosophical position known as naturalism or materialism. Evolutionary scientists assume that nature's all there is and that nature is composed of material entities, the particles that physicists study. It follows, logically, that science must and can explain the origin of complex living organisms solely by natural causes, meaning unintelligent causes. God may not create directly, nor may God direct evolution, because God is an intelligent being and evolution is by definition a mindless process. And yet, even according to the leading Darwinist Richard Dawkins, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Is it possible that they appear that way because they actually were designed and there really is a designer? Evolutionary biologists emphatically answer no, not because of the evidence, but because their philosophy effectively excludes that designer from reality. They insist against the evidence that unguided chemical processes can produce living organisms from non-living chemicals, and that a combination of random mutations and natural selection can, given enough time, produce complex plants and animals from single-celled ancestors through a mindless process. These far-reaching claims, loaded with religious implications, are not supported by the scientific evidence. My colleagues and I want to separate the real science from the materialist philosophy that provides the only real support for this Darwinist theory.
Thank you, Professor Johnson. An opening statement from Ms. Scott.
Now, hearing Phil define evolution is a little bit like having Madalyn Murray O'Hair define Christianity. Let me define evolution the way scientists define evolution, the way we're going to use it on our side of the table. Evolution is used two ways. One is a bigger idea that the present is different from the past, that the universe has had a history, that stars, galaxies, the planet Earth, plants and animals on it have changed through time. Biological evolution is a subset of the idea of change through time, saying that living things, plants and animals, have shared common ancestors and have descended with modification from those ancestors. Now notice in this definition, I talked about what happened. I didn't talk about who done it, and I didn't talk about how, because those are separate issues. Scientists are very much united on what happened. Evolution happened, to modify a bumper sticker. But how it happened is something that we argue about a lot in science. How important is natural selection? How important are other mechanisms? Whodunit is something that as scientists we can't comment on as scientists. We can put on our philosopher's hat and comment as individuals, but as scientists we can't deal with ultimate cause. So I think we have to be very clear about what we mean by evolution. What they mean by evolution is some sort of a metaphysical system that we do not recognize.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. You have 5 minutes to question Ms. Scott, Professor.
Yes. Do you say that Darwinian evolution does not have a profound religious implication of discouraging belief that there is an intelligent creator who brought about our existence for a purpose?
I think that to some people, yes, natural selection, Darwinism is evolution through natural selection, does cause problems. If your theology requires you to interpret the Bible literally, 6 24-hour days, 10,000 years ago, and so forth, you're going to have a problem.
But only for biblical literalists, not for the proposition that I asked about, which is that a creator brought about our existence for a purpose.
I don't think so in the broader sense, because, for example, there was a survey done not too long ago of American men and women of science, and one of the questions that they asked was something on the order of evolution occur. Human beings evolved, but God directed the process. 40% of scientists agreed with that, which is the same as the general public. So clearly the idea of evolution can't be totally negative.
We don't know whether they were evolutionary biologists, do we? They weren't, we aren't talking about Richard Dawkins, Stephen Jay Gould, and Richard Lewontin in that poll, are we?
There are evolutionary biologists who have made something of a philosophical statement out of evolution. You and I both agree with that. But I think you have to be careful about not tarring all evolutionary biologists with that brush.
Let's get to that statement. Are you familiar with this kind of a symbol? A fish here that says Jesus in it, you see it on cars. And then you're familiar with this one,
I am
too.
indeed.
And is it your view that the relationship, the resemblance between these two is not coincidental?
Oh, not at all. Not at all.
This is what we call evidence of intelligent design.
You might consider it an evolution of the fish, but...
Yes, now, so in fact, this is put on to mock the Christian fish symbol, isn't it, with Darwin there right in the place of Jesus.
I suspect some people consider it a form of mockery. I have also, driving around Berkeley, I don't know how unusual Berkeley is from other cities in the country, but I have seen the Darwin fish and the Christian fish facing each other on bumpers. So obviously not everybody,
well,
it's a rather ecumenical car there, I think.
I notice here I have a letter from the National Centers for Science Education signed by you, and I notice Professor Roos and Professor Miller are on the letterhead. And it says, your letter says, quite a few NCSE members sport the Darwin fish on their cars, and for a $50 donation, I'd be delighted to send you something new, a sturdy Darwin fish refrigerator magnet, also good for keeping things in your filing cabinet. So you've rather thought that would have quite an appeal to the members of your organization, didn't you?
I sort of wish I was Jerry Brown and I could hold up an 800 number here so that you could all call and donate to the National Center for Science Education. But yeah, a lot of our members are people who are very concerned about the teaching of evolution in the public schools. So therefore, they find the Darwin fish attractive. You'll notice, as a member of NCSE and somebody who receives our newsletter, we don't advertise it in the newsletter. We don't make a big point of sort of trying to sell
just to
this,
the members.
because some people are offended by it. We're not in the business of offending Christians.
Now, you are aware, and I think you're quite willing to agree with me on this, that whatever may be the ultimate truth of this, many people do use Darwinian evolution as an argument for atheism.
Correct.
And in fact, the impression is widely around that this is done with the approval, tacit approval at least, of the scientific establishment. Richard Dawkins goes around the world arguing this without being criticized by authoritative sources. And Carl Sagan, who did that famous Cosmos series saying the cosmos is all there is or ever was or ever will be, was honored with the Public Welfare Medal by the National Academy of Sciences. So there is some reason for people to think this, and I think your participation in changing the National Association of Biology teachers' statement also indicated that. Now,
wait a minute. The statement was changed in a way that you would
Yes,
agree
I understand
with.
that, but I mean that there was some reason for concern in the prior version of the statement.
Absolutely.
Yes, I was just trying to agree with you here. Now, I'm trying to help you with this credibility problem. And what I wonder is, wouldn't it be a good idea at this point if the National Academy of Sciences, which so vigorously addressed these issues when it was fighting the legal battle against creation science, took the issue up again? And developed a panel. The last time they appointed 7 scientists and 4 lawyers to this panel, so Mr. Lynn and I could both be there, to address the question of what is the message they want to send the public. Do they want to send the public the message that evolution is an unsupervised, unintelligent, impersonal process? Do they want to send a message that is so effectively used for promotion of atheistic materialism, or do they want to criticize that as non-science? Wouldn't it be a good idea?
You can answer that question.
Yes, wouldn't it be a good idea
There
to
have now
take
been
that
9
up?
questions.
Would you agree with me that they should take it up?
Yeah,
Well, I said there are things you said that I agree with and things you said that I don't agree with. Let's start with the places where we agree. I agree that many scientists have been very sloppy about how they use terms like natural selection, purpose, etc. And I, for one, as Phil has kindly pointed out, have criticized this. I've criticized Dawkins. Many other scientists have it all. I am not a believer. I would agree philosophically with Richard Dawkins, but I don't think that he should be confusing his philosophical views with science. He shouldn't be passing his philosophical views about materialism off as if they're inevitably arising from evolution. So I think that in order to encourage you, I think we are going to see more things like the NABT statement. We're going to see more recognition on the part of the science and education communities that, indeed, we have to be more careful with how we use terms. And I accept that.
You can now
the
start
good news
asking.
is that the National Academy of Science is rewriting the Science and Creationism booklet. And I'm on the committee that's advising them.
Yes, I know. It's a very one-sided movement.
Well, one-sided in the sense we're all in favor of teaching of evolution. That doesn't sound too strange.
Take this opportunity to ask some
Yes, sir.
questions.
In my reading of your materials, Phil, I see that you have argued 3 things. Evolution, which I have just defined as descent with modification, doesn't happen. A second thing that you argue is that Darwinism, which is natural selection, evolution by natural selection, natural selection is not a powerful enough mechanism to produce descent with modification. A third thing I see in your writings is that science, and especially evolution, is inherently a metaphysical belief system. Now, lawyers are used to hypothetical questions, so if you don't mind my asking you a hypothetical question.
Don't mind at all.
If you could wave a wand over this audience and make everyone here in this audience agree with one of those points, which is your most important one? What really grabs you?
There's no doubt about what the key point is. By the way, of course, I don't deny that there is such a thing as descent with modification. The question is how much it explains, is descent. But the key question, and the only really important one from a philosophical and cultural standpoint, is the mechanism. Can you make those things that look as if they were designed for a purpose, those extremely complicated, irreducibly complex biological organisms, through a mindless material process, specifically the accumulation of micromutations through natural selection? The mechanism is the big issue.
Number two, in other words. If I could follow up with that, are you aware of the arguments that are going on in evolutionary biology today in which the role of natural selection is debated? There already is quite a conversation going on as to how much natural selection explains. What about the other mechanisms that are suggested to produce evolutionary change?
There aren't really any other mechanisms. That's why natural selection remains, and you can see this whenever the criticism comes up. It's very effective criticism from Stephen Jay Gould and others, but there is no alternative to do the adaptation building process, and Gould himself says that in his recent article, Darwinian Fundamentalism.
But even you agree that natural selection is adequate for producing microevolutionary processes.
Well, microevolution is misnamed. Natural selection, as in for example, the finch-beak variation example, brings out the variation already present in the gene pool in a fundamentally stable population. It doesn't create anything.
How about explaining that?
Yes, finch-beaks, in a population of birds on an island, finch-beaks are a little larger sometimes, a little smaller. Sometimes on the average, the population is essentially stable. It isn't going anywhere and isn't changing into anything.
What is your unit of change that microevolution applies to?
The question
what is a kind, in other words?
The question is the source of genetic information. An organism is much more complex than a computer program or a spaceship. What is the origin of that information? When you've got a gene pool with all that information in it, it can vary within limits.
I'm sorry, Phil, I didn't make my question clear. You talk about species of finch on an island and the amount of genetic variability in that species, and your argument, I think, is you just get change within the kind. What is a kind? I mean, so if dogs are a kind, are wolves part of that kind? If dogs and wolves are part of the kind, are coyotes part of the kind? What's the limit of genetic variability? What's the group, what's the unit that you're talking about in which microevolution can take place?
Yes, I don't think we know precisely what the limits of variation are. With domestic animal breeding, you haven't been able even to get to speciation. But I think that there's good circumstantial evidence that there may have been wider change and development at some time in the past by mechanisms that aren't understood. What you clearly don't get is the classes, the phyla, the major groups, the major innovations in complex organs that way.
Thank you very much, both of you.